The gunshot tore through the night. Inside the cabin, Emily collapsed to the floor, blood spreading across her cotton dress like a blooming desert rose. Her golden hair, once neatly pinned, now hung in dirty tangles around her bruised face. At 19, she had already seen more cruelty than most would in a lifetime. Leland Blackwood towered above her, his leather whip dangling from calloused fingers. At 65, his face was a map of deep lines carved by desert sun and bourbon nights. His breath reeked of cheap whiskey as he leaned closer. The silver six-point star of his bolo tie glinted in the lamplight. "Take it off," he growled, gesturing at her torn dress with the barrel of his Colt Navy 1851. The revolver's walnut grip was worn smooth from decades of use, its brass frame catching the firelight. "You're my property now. $200, cash money." Emily's blue eyes welled with tears. Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. "I'll take it off. Please don't kill me." Blackwood laughed, the sound like gravel in a steel drum. He took another swig from his bottle, then slumped into a chair, the pistol still trained on her trembling form. Soon his head nodded, and the liquor took him to a fitful sleep. The revolver slipped from his fingers, landing with a dull thud on the rough-hewn floor. Emily didn't hesitate. She slipped through the cabin door into the cold Texas night. Her bare feet bled on the sharp rocks as she ran, but the pain was nothing compared to what waited behind her. The Chizos Mountains loomed in the distance, black against the star-filled sky. She followed the North Star, just as her father had taught her when she was a child in Boston. She didn't leave tracks in the rocky soil. She kept to hard ground and crossed streams when she could, moving from shadow to shadow like a hunted deer. Blackwood would come looking. Men like him didn't let property escape. The night chill cut through her torn dress, but fear kept her warm and moving. By dawn, her strength was fading. Thirst clawed at her throat. The desert stretched endlessly before her, an ocean of dust and stone. When she heard the growling, her heart stopped. 5 gray wolves emerged from behind a stand of mesquite, hunger in their yellow eyes. The lead wolf bared its teeth, tense to spring. The rifle shot cracked like thunder. The lead wolf dropped dead, a perfect shot through the neck. The others scattered as a second shot kicked up dust at their heels, the sound echoing across the canyon walls. "Don't move," a deep voice commanded. Caleb Morgan sat atop his chestnut mare, Winchester Model 1873 rifle still smoking in his weathered hands. At 45, his face was hard as the Texas limestone, etched with lines of experience and loss. A long scar ran from his right temple to his jaw, a gift from a Confederate saber at Gettysburg, where he'd fought with the 4th Texas Infantry, Company D. His eyes were steel gray and missed nothing, scanning the horizon with the practiced vigilance of a man who'd survived 3 Comanche ambushes. "Please," Emily whispered, collapsing to her knees. "I'll take it off. Whatever you want." Morgan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. Not desire, but recognition of the kind of terror that only comes from human cruelty. "I'm not that kind of man," he said, dismounting with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent most of his life on horseback. The Winchester remained ready in his grip, not pointed at her, but not slung either. "You're running from something or someone." He offered his canteen, the worn leather case bearing the faded initials CM branded into the side. Emily drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. "Blackwood," she managed between gulps. "Leland Blackwood." Morgan's hand froze on the reins. His jaw tightened, the scar whitening against his tan skin. "Blackwood," he repeated, the name like poison on his tongue. "The rancher from Diablo Creek." Emily nodded, suddenly wary of the dangerous stillness in the man before her. "He bought me," she said, "from men who promised teaching positions in Texas to girls from Boston. My father is Charles Hartwell, a banker. He doesn't know where I am. Morgan helped her onto his horse, his movements efficient, not gentle but not cruel. As they rode toward his ranch, Emily told her story, how she'd answered an advertisement in the Boston Herald, how the well-dressed man had drugged her tea on the train west, how she'd awakened in a wagon with other women, all bound for auction to men like Blackwood. Morgan listened in silence. When they crested the hill above his ranch, a modest spread with a sturdy house, barn, and corral, he finally spoke. 5 years ago, Leland Blackwood gave false testimony that sent my brother to the gallows. Said he saw him kill a land surveyor. My brother never killed anyone. He dismounted and helped Emily down, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon where dust devils danced in the afternoon heat. I've been waiting for a chance at Blackwood, he said, his voice quiet but hard as iron. He checked the cylinder of his Remington Army revolver, spinning it with practiced precision before settling it back in its holster, a habit as natural as breathing. Looks like that chance just found me. 3 days passed. Emily's strength returned slowly, nourished by Morgan's simple but hearty cooking and uninterrupted sleep in his spare room. She wore clothes that had once belonged to Morgan's wife, a woman long dead from fever along with their infant son. Morgan himself slept in the barn, giving her space and privacy that Blackwood would never have granted. On the fourth morning, dust rose on the horizon. Morgan watched through his brass spyglass, his expression unchanging when he spotted 3 riders approaching. Blackwood, he said, collapsing the spyglass with a practiced snap. With 2 guns for hire, Jenkins and Reyes. Bad men both. Emily paled, but Morgan handed her a shotgun, a greener double barrel with the stock cut down for easier handling. Stay inside. If things go wrong, both barrels center mass. Don't hesitate. The kick will be strong, so brace against the doorframe when you fire. Emily's hands trembled as she took the weapon, but her eyes showed determination. I've fired shotguns before, she admitted. My father believed a Boston banker's daughter should be able to protect herself. Sunday afternoons at his hunting lodge. Morgan raised an eyebrow, reassessing her. Good. Then you know what to do. He strapped on his gun belt, adjusting it so the Remington hung just right at his hip. Years as a lawman before retreating to his ranch had taught him the value of split-second draws. He stepped onto the porch, thumbs hooked in his belt, and waited. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air into a shimmering haze above the hard-packed earth of the yard. Blackwood's party stopped 30 yards out. The old rancher's face was a thundercloud, his eyes narrowed against the midday glare. Morgan, he spat, tobacco juice staining his gray beard. You've got something that belongs to me? Morgan's face remained impassive, carved from stone. Nobody belongs to anybody, Blackwood. Not since the war ended. I paid cash money for that girl. $200. Same as you paid them witnesses to hang my brother? Morgan's voice was soft, but it carried across the yard like the whisper of a rattlesnake. William Morgan, remember him? Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Recognition dawned, followed by calculation. A muscle twitched in his leathery cheek. That was business. This is business too. Step aside. Not happening. Jenkins, a weasel-faced man with a waxed mustache and a pockmarked complexion, moved his hand toward his holster, a cheap cross-draw rig that telegraphed his intent. Morgan's draw was a blur, the Remington clearing leather and firing in one fluid motion before Jenkins's fingers even touched his weapon. The sound cracked across the yard, echoing off the barn walls. Jenkins tumbled from his saddle, a red stain blossoming across his chest, his expression one of surprise rather than pain. Reyes, quicker than his companion, managed to get a shot off. The bullet splintered the porch post beside Morgan's head, sending wood chips flying. Morgan pivoted smoothly, the Remington barking again, His second shot caught Reyes in the shoulder, spinning him from his horse with a howl of pain. Blackwood hadn't moved for his gun. He was smarter than that, his cold eyes assessing Morgan with new respect and simmering hatred. "This isn't over," he said, before turning his horse. "Not by a long shot." Reyes struggled to his feet, clutching his bleeding shoulder, and mounted awkwardly. The two men rode away, leaving Jenkins' body in the dust, already drawing flies in the merciless Texas heat. Morgan waited until they were specks on the horizon before lowering his gun. His hands didn't shake. They never did during or after a fight. That would come later, in the dark hours when memories of other battles plagued his sleep. "We need to bury him," he said when Emily emerged, her shotgun still clutched in white-knuckled hands. "Then we ride to redemption." "What's in redemption?" Emily asked, staring at the dead man whose blood was turning black in the dust. "The law," Morgan replied, his tone suggesting he didn't expect much from it. "What's left of it?" Redemption was a town clinging to civilization by its fingernails. A single dusty street lined with false-fronted buildings. The Drover's Rest Saloon, Wilcox General Store, Sweeney's Blacksmith, the jailhouse. The settlement had sprung up at the crossroads of the cattle drives and the Western Union telegraph line, growing just enough to warn a sheriff and little else. Morgan and Emily dismounted in front of the jailhouse. A brass star hung crookedly on the door beneath the words, "Sheriff Wallace." The hinges creaked as they entered, the sound announcing their presence better than any bell. Inside, Sheriff Tyler Wallace looked up from his cluttered desk. At 50, Wallace was running to fat, his once impressive frame softened by years of taking the easy path. His badge gleamed on his vest, but his gun belt hung on a peg behind him rather than around his waist. The mark of a man who no longer expected trouble or no longer cared to face it. Recognition, then wariness crossed his face when Morgan entered. "Morgan," he nodded, setting down the wanted poster he'd been examining. "Heard you had trouble out at your place. Jenkins?" "He drew first," Morgan said simply, not bothering with details. Wallace sighed, rubbing his gray stubbled jaw. "Always was a hothead. What brings you to town?" Morgan explained about Emily, about Blackwood, about the auction of women from back east. With each word, Wallace's face grew more troubled, his eyes darting to the window as if checking whether anyone might overhear. "You're stirring a hornet's nest, Morgan," Wallace finally said, lowering his voice to just above a whisper. "Blackwood isn't just some rancher. He's part of the syndicate." "What syndicate?" Wallace glanced at the door, then leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "Powerful men, including Judge Bishop. They run everything from here to El Paso. Women, liquor, protection. The judge signs the papers that make it all legal. The banks handle the money. And men like Blackwood do the dirty work." "There's nothing legal about selling women," Morgan countered, his tone flat. Wallace spread his hands helplessly, the gesture of a man long reconciled to his own cowardice. "What would you have me do? I'm one man with a tin star against half the county. They own judges, politicians, hell, probably the governor too." Morgan's disgust showed plainly in the tightening of his jaw. "So you just look the other way?" "I choose my battles," Wallace replied defensively, "and this isn't one I can win." Morgan turned to leave, his spurs jingling against the wooden floor. "Then I'll fight it myself," Wallace called after him. "Blackwood won't come alone next time, Morgan. He'll bring an army." Outside, Morgan headed straight for the saloon. Inside, Marcus Johnson was polishing glasses behind the bar. At 50, the former Buffalo soldier still stood straight as a ramrod, his dark skin contrasting with silver hair cut military short. His massive forearms, corded with muscle, spoke of a strength that belied his age. He'd served alongside Morgan in the Texas Fourth, one of the few black men who'd fought for the Confederacy, though not by choice. The gold tooth that flashed when he smiled was a replacement for one knocked out by a Union soldier's rifle butt at Antietam. "Caleb Morgan," Marcus grinned, revealing that gold front tooth. "Thought you'd sworn off whiskey and people." "Just whiskey," Morgan answered, introducing Emily. Marcus's face darkened as he heard her story, his hands unconsciously tightening on the glass he was polishing until it seemed in danger of shattering. "Blackwood and Bishop," he spat. "Devil's own partnership. Been running girls through here for years. Rumor says they've got a shipment coming in next week. 20 girls from Chicago. All promised respectable work as teachers and nurses. I need information, Marcus. Everything you can get on Blackwood and Bishop. Their men, their movements." Marcus nodded gravely, setting down the glass. "Dangerous game, Caleb. But I'm in." His eyes held a warrior's resolve. "For William's sake, if nothing else." Back at the ranch, Morgan wasted no time. He handed Emily a Colt pocket revolver, its 5-shot cylinder freshly oiled, the blue steel gleaming in the afternoon light. "5 shots, double action," he instructed, demonstrating the mechanism. "No cocking needed, just pull the trigger. Sights are fixed, so aim center at anything closer than 20 yards. For anything further, aim slightly high to compensate for the drop." He guided her hands into the proper grip, standing behind her as she aimed at a tin can perched on a fence post. "Both hands, firm but not rigid. When you pull the trigger, don't jerk. Squeeze steadily." Emily took her stance, feet shoulder-width apart, just as her father had taught her. She squeezed the trigger. The can jumped and clattered to the ground. "Good," Morgan acknowledged, genuine surprise in his tone. "Now again, but faster." 3 more cans fell in quick succession. The 5th shot went wide. "You weren't exaggerating about your father's lessons," Morgan observed, his assessment of her shifting once more. Emily reloaded the revolver with cartridges from a wooden box, her movements becoming more confident with practice. "Father insisted I learn after Mother was attacked during a bank robbery. He said a proper Boston lady should appear refined in the parlor, but be deadly in a crisis." Her eyes met Morgan's. "I never thought I'd need those skills until now." Morgan's expression remained stoic, but he gave a slight nod of approval. "When the time comes, aim for the body, not the head or limbs. 2 shots center mass. Don't stop until they're down." Emily's hands steadied as she chambered the rounds. "I've never shot a person," she admitted quietly. "When the time comes, you'll find it's easier than you think," Morgan said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "And harder to live with after." Over the next days, they prepared the ranch for attack. Morgan dug rifle pits at strategic points around the property, using techniques he'd learned during the war. He rigged tripwires connected to shotgun traps, simple but lethal mechanisms designed to fire when a wire was tripped. Emily helped him stockpile ammunition at key defensive positions, learning the layout of the ranch from a tactical perspective. Marcus rode out at dusk on the 5th day, his horse lathered from hard riding, foam flecking its dark hide. He dismounted with urgency, his face grim. "They're coming tomorrow," he panted, accepting the water Emily offered. Blackwood hired 6 gunmen from Fort Stockton, mean bastards who fought for Quantrill during the war. Raiders, not soldiers. They kill for pleasure as much as money. His expression darkened further as he continued. "Bishop's providing legal cover. Papers claiming you kidnapped Blackwood's indentured servant. He's got Wallace ready to serve a warrant, though the sheriff's not happy about it." Morgan absorbed this information without visible reaction, methodically checking the action on his Winchester. "How many total?" 8, including Blackwood and Reyes. They aim to hit at dawn, coming from the east with the sun at their backs. Emily, listening from the porch, stepped forward, her jaw set with determination. "My father has connections. Government officials, federal marshals. If I could get word to him—" "Western Union and Redemption," Marcus suggested. "I know the operator. He could send a telegram to Boston without the syndicate knowing. Morgan considered this, eyes scanning the distant ridgeline. It won't help us tomorrow, but it might help afterward. He looked at Emily. Write your telegram. Make it count. That night, as Emily slept fitfully in the house, Morgan and Marcus kept watch from the barn roof. The stars wheeled overhead, countless and cold. A coyote called in the distance, its lonely howl echoing across the empty landscape. Just like Chattanooga, Marcus said softly, waiting for the attack we knew was coming. Morgan checked the load in his revolver for the 10th time, the familiar weight of the weapon comforting in his hand. Difference is, this time we're fighting for something worth saving. Before dawn, they took their positions. Morgan in the hayloft with his Winchester, Emily in the root cellar with a shotgun and a clear view of the yard, Marcus behind the water trough with 2 revolvers. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east when the first rider appeared on the ridge. Blackwood's men came with the sunrise, spreading out to surround the ranch in a practiced flanking maneuver. They weren't expecting the preparation. Morgan's first shot took down a man trying to circle behind the barn, the Winchester's report splitting the morning silence. The man fell without a sound, his horse galloping away riderless. Marcus caught another trying to reach the house, his twin colts speaking in rapid succession. A third attacker triggered a shotgun trap and fell screaming, his leg nearly severed at the knee. The battle intensified as the remaining attackers found cover and returned fire. Bullets splintered wood and shattered windows. Emily crouched in her hiding place, waiting, the shotgun ready. When a shadow fell across the root cellar door, she didn't hesitate. Both barrels roared, and the man tumbled backward, his chest a ruined mess. Her father's lessons, combined with Morgan's instruction, had turned theoretical knowledge into lethal action. For 20 minutes, the air was thick with gun smoke and the crack of rifles. When a lull finally came, Morgan surveyed the damage. 3 of Blackwood's men lay dead. 1 more was wounded too badly to ride, moaning pitifully where he lay pinned down by Morgan's rifle. Blackwood himself and 2 others had retreated beyond rifle range, but hadn't left. They sat their horses on a distant ridge, watching, waiting. Morgan had caught a bullet in his left arm, painful but not serious. The lead had passed clean through the muscle without hitting bone. Marcus bandaged it with practiced efficiency, using a strip torn from a clean shirt and a splash of whiskey that made Morgan hiss through clenched teeth. "They'll wait us out," Marcus said grimly, tying off the bandage. "Or bring more men." Emily emerged from her hiding place, face streaked with dust but resolute. The empty shotgun hung at her side, her hands remarkably steady for someone who'd just killed for the first time. "I won't be the cause of your death," she declared. "Maybe I should just—" "No," Morgan cut her off, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Giving you back won't stop this. Blackwood wants me dead now." 2. He stared out the window at the distant figures, measuring angles and distances with a soldier's eye. "We've been reacting," he said slowly, a plan forming in his mind. "Time to take the fight to them." Night fell like a black curtain over the standoff. Under cover of darkness, Morgan slipped away from the ranch, leaving Marcus to guard Emily. He moved like a ghost through the mesquite, a skill honed tracking Comanche during the war. His moccasins, worn instead of boots for silence, made no sound on the rocky ground. The bullet wound in his arm throbbed with each heartbeat, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing only on his objective. By midnight, he'd worked his way behind Blackwood's position, using every scrap of cover the desert landscape provided. The old rancher had set up camp in a shallow arroyo, believing the high walls would protect his men from rifle fire, a tactical error that Morgan intended to exploit. Blackwood sat before a small fire, conferring with his remaining men. Morgan crept close enough to hear their voices, settling into a position behind a boulder with the patience of a mountain lion. "Get word to Bishop," Blackwood was saying, sipping coffee from a tin cup. He'll send the sheriff with papers. Make it all nice and legal. One of the gunmen spat into the fire, causing it to hiss. Legal or not, Morgan's gonna fight. I ain't dying for $200. You'll get 500 when this is done. Blackwood snapped, his face twisted with fury in the firelight. Bishop wants that girl silenced and Morgan in the ground. There's more at stake here than you know. What does Bishop care about some Boston girl? The other gunman asked, cleaning his revolver with practiced movements. She's seen too much. And if her father's who she claims, well, banking connections like that could cause problems for our operation. Bishop's got investors coming next month. Big money from Chicago. Can't have any loose ends. Morgan had heard enough. He melted back into the darkness, retreating the way he'd come. Each piece of information was a weapon more valuable than any bullet. By the time he reached the ranch, a plan had fully formed in his mind. Bishop's the head of the snake, he told Marcus and Emily as they gathered around the kitchen table. We cut that off. Blackwood loses his protection. The whole syndicate could collapse. Marcus frowned, pouring coffee into chipped mugs. Bishop's ranch is 15 miles east. Well guarded. Man like that has enemies. Not expecting us, though, Morgan countered, spreading out a crude map he'd sketched. They think we're pinned down here. And tomorrow, when Wallace shows up with those papers, they'll think they've won. So we just ride up to a judge's house and shoot him? Emily asked incredulously, her hands cradling the hot mug. No, Morgan said, tapping the map. We find evidence. Bishop keeps records, contracts, payments. Emily's telegram mentioned girls being sold. If we can get those papers to the federal marshal in El Paso. That's a big if, Marcus cautioned, studying the map. Morgan's eyes held a cold determination that both his companions recognized. It was the look of a man who'd made peace with whatever might come. Got a better plan? Marcus sighed, then nodded once. When do we leave? They rode out at dusk, leaving the wounded gunman tied up in the barn with water and hardtack. Cruel mercy, but mercy nonetheless. Their path took them wide around Blackwood's position, then east toward Judge Bishop's sprawling ranch. The white-columned main house stood out against the darkening sky, like a plantation dropped incongruously into the Texas wilderness. Gas lamps illuminated the wraparound porch, and the silhouettes of armed men patrolled the grounds. Too many windows, Morgan muttered, studying the house through his spyglass. But there's a side entrance to what looks like an office. One guard rotating every hour. They approached from downwind, ensuring the guard dogs wouldn't catch their scent. Morgan took out the lone guard at the side door with the butt of his revolver. Quick, silent, effective. The man slumped to the ground without a sound, breathing but unconscious. The office was opulent, leather-bound books lining mahogany shelves, a massive desk dominating the room. Crystal decanters of amber liquor caught the moonlight streaming through tall windows. Morgan went straight for the desk while Marcus watched the door and Emily examined a filing cabinet. Here, Emily whispered urgently after a few minutes of searching, holding up a leather ledger. Names, dates, amounts paid. Her finger traced a line. My name is in here, and 20 others from Boston alone. Morgan found more. Letters between Bishop and officials in Austin, even one bearing the governor's seal. Documents authorizing labor contracts that were thinly veiled slavery agreements. Receipts for bribes paid to sheriffs across 3 counties. We've got him, Morgan said, stuffing papers into his saddlebag. This is enough to... The door burst open. Judge Harlan Bishop stood there in a silk dressing gown, a derringer aimed at Morgan's chest. Behind him, Leland Blackwood grinned triumphantly, his Colt Navy leveled at Marcus. Thought you might try something stupid, Morgan, Blackwood drawled. Saw you skulking around our camp last night. Wasn't hard to figure your next move. Bishop, a corpulent man with small, cruel eyes and jowls that shook with indignation, stepped forward. The fine carpet muffled his slippered feet. Breaking and entering, theft of private documents. I could hang you just for that. His gaze fell on Emily. And you, my dear, have proven most troublesome. These documents prove you're selling women, Morgan said calmly, his hands carefully visible. Slavery's still illegal, last I checked. Bishop laughed, a sound like wet silk tearing. Who do you think you are? He sneered. I am the law here. No, Morgan replied, his voice steady. The law is justice, and today, justice gets served. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Marcus lunged for Blackwood, a move they'd practiced countless times during the war. The feint that drew an enemy's fire while your partner took the shot. Two guns fired simultaneously, the sound deafening in the confined space. Blackwood staggered back, blood blossoming on his shirt front where Morgan's bullet found his heart. But Marcus collapsed too, a bullet in his chest, his face contorted with pain, but also grim satisfaction. Bishop turned his derringer toward Morgan, but he was too slow. A banker's reflexes against a gunfighter's. The Remington in Morgan's hand roared twice. Bishop fell backward across his desk, his silk robe now stained crimson, his small pistol unfired. Marcus! Emily rushed to the fallen man's side, pressing her hands against the wound in a futile attempt to stem the bleeding. Marcus coughed, blood speckling his lips. His dark eyes found Morgan's. Did we get the bastards? He whispered, his voice fading. We got them, Morgan assured him, kneeling beside his old friend. Both of them. Marcus smiled faintly, his gold tooth gleaming one last time. Worth it, he said. For William. His eyes fixed on something distant, then grew still. Morgan closed his friend's eyes gently, his face a mask of controlled grief. When he stood, Blackwood was propped against the wall, clutching his stomach wound, blood seeping between his fingers. You won't make it, the old rancher wheezed, his face gray with approaching death. The syndicate reaches everywhere. Not anymore, Morgan said, placing the barrel of his Remington against Blackwood's forehead. The old man's eyes widened, fear finally breaking through his arrogance. Wait! The final shot echoed through the mansion. Dawn broke over redemption as Morgan rode in, Emily beside him, Marcus's body draped over his horse. The streets were empty save for Sheriff Wallace, who stood in front of his office as if he'd been waiting. Behind him, half the town had gathered, drawn by the news that traveled faster than any horse. Jesus, Morgan, Wallace breathed, taking in the blood-stained clothing and grim expressions. What have you done? Morgan dismounted stiffly, the wound in his arm reopened during the night's activities. He handed Wallace the saddlebag of documents, each movement deliberate despite his exhaustion. What you should have, he replied, his voice rough from a night without water. Bishop and Blackwood are dead. Wallace blanched, his hands fumbling with the saddlebag's buckle. You're a walking dead man, Morgan. The syndicate is finished, Emily interrupted, holding up a telegram that had been waiting at the Western Union office when they rode in. This came through last night. Wallace read it aloud, his voice growing stronger with each line. Federal agents en route. Stop governor under investigation. Stop Hartwell banking. Using full influence. Stop hold position. Stop. He looked up, meeting the eyes of the townspeople who had gathered closer. It's signed by a federal judge in Washington, he added, something like hope kindling in his tired face. Morgan looked at Wallace steadily, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on his arm. Which side of this are you on, Sheriff? Time to choose. Wallace hesitated, looking from Morgan to the crowd, then to the badge on his chest. Something shifted in his expression. A decision long in coming. He unpinned his star and held it toward Morgan. I owe you an apology, Morgan. I chose wrong before. He offered the badge. his hands steady now. Town needs a real lawman now. Morgan stared at the star for a long moment, memories washing over him. 5 years ago, he'd thrown away his own badge, retreating to his ranch to nurse old wounds and bitter memories. Now, right, holding Bishop's documents in one hand and Wallace's badge in the other, he felt something he hadn't in years: purpose. 2 weeks later, Morgan stood on the platform of Redemption's small train station. His arm was properly bandaged now, healing clean thanks to the town doctor's care. The sheriff's badge gleamed on his vest, polished and straight. The federal marshals had come as promised, bringing with them the weight of Washington's authority. The remaining members of the syndicate had been arrested or had fled, leaving behind their enterprises. The Chicago-bound girls were freed before ever reaching Texas, their passage home secured by the Hartwell Banking Company. Charles Hartwell himself had arrived by special train from Boston, bringing with him the full weight of Eastern money and political connections. He was a tall man with Emily's blue eyes and an iron will that had faced down financial panics without blinking. His gratitude to Morgan was effusive. "You saved my daughter when law and God seemed to have abandoned her," he said, offering his hand. "I don't forget such debts." He'd offered Morgan a position in Boston managing bank security at twice what a rancher or sheriff could ever hope to earn. It was the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime. "I appreciate the offer," Morgan said, adjusting the sheriff's star on his vest, "but I reckon I'm needed here." The truth was, Boston with its cobblestone streets and genteel society held no appeal for him. The West, for all its hardships, was where he belonged, where a man was measured by his actions, not his breeding. Emily, preparing to return to Boston with her father, stood with Morgan on the station platform. She'd exchanged her borrowed clothes for a proper traveling suit, though something in her posture suggested she'd never again be the sheltered society girl who'd left Boston. "The federal marshal says they've identified 32 girls sold through Bishop's operation," she said. "Most are going home, but some have nowhere to go." "Town's taking up a collection," Morgan replied. "Figure we can help them get settled, wherever they choose." Emily studied his face, noting how the hard lines had softened slightly in the past weeks. "Will you be all right?" she asked. "There might still be syndicate men who want revenge." Morgan's face remained impassive, but his eyes had lost some of their hardness. "Let them come," he said simply, his hand resting comfortably on the Remington at his hip. Emily hesitated, then asked, "Could I write to you? Perhaps visit someday?" A ghost of a smile touched Morgan's lips, the first she'd seen. "The West always welcomes those brave enough to face it," he said, his words an invitation, but not a plea. As the train pulled away, Morgan watched until it was just a smudge of smoke on the horizon. Then he turned back toward Redemption. The town stretched before him, imperfect, damaged, but worth fighting for. Just like the justice he'd finally claimed. He checked his Remington, adjusted his hat against the Texas sun, and walked toward his future, one step at a time. Behind him, the ghosts of William and Marcus seemed to nod in approval. Justice had been served, and though the cost had been high, some debts could only be paid in blood.